Picture a lobby, marble floor, brass mail slots, 11 people standing in it, and 2 children who vanished out of it 4 minutes ago. Now pick the one who gets them back. You have a father in a $9,000 coat with his phone in both hands. You have 2 detectives with 22 years between them. You have a building manager, a porter, a night concierge, a woman from the 12th floor who used to be a prosecutor, and a private security consultant who has already handed out 3 business cards. And you have a doorman, 44 years old, gray at the temples, standing by the door because that is where he always stands, holding the clipboard he uses to log deliveries. Be honest, you did not pick the doorman. I'm Nathan, and the reason I'm starting here is that this story is really about a mistake all of us make every single day. We do not measure competence. We read costume. We look at a uniform and we decide, in about a fifth of a second, exactly how much a man is capable of, and then we spend the rest of the conversation defending that guess. Everyone in that lobby did it. The kidnappers did it too, and they had spent 11 weeks studying that building. The next 15 hours cost one of them everything. Emmett Tiernan had opened the same door for 6 years, and in 6 years nobody had ever asked him what he did before. That was, in fact, the entire point of the job. The Corvain stood on a corner of Chicago's Gold Coast where the wind came off the lake in January and hit the building's east face hard enough to make the awning drum like a snare. It was 26 stories of limestone and dark bronze, built in 1928 by a man who made his money in freight scales and wanted a lobby that looked like a cathedral built for money. It had a marble floor laid in a black and cream compass rose, a ceiling of coffered plaster 22 feet up, and a revolving brass door that turned so smoothly you could push it with one finger. Emmett oiled it himself every 3rd Tuesday because the maintenance contract said quarterly, and quarterly made it stiff, and a stiff door made old residents lean their weight into it, and old residents who leaned their weight into things eventually fell. He came on shift at 6 in the morning and stood down at 4 in the afternoon, and between those 2 hours he ran a small kingdom that nobody in the building knew existed. He knew that Mrs. Vreeland in 9A walked at 7:40 and needed her mail carried up if she was not back by 8:15. He knew which 4 residents had let a fire door key walk off with an ex-partner, and he had quietly gotten all 4 re-cord without making anyone admit anything. He kept a clipboard. On the clipboard was a delivery log, and under the delivery log, on a second sheet nobody ever asked about, was a different list. Vehicles that parked on the east side longer than 20 minutes. People who came in behind a resident instead of ringing. Anyone who asked a question about the building rather than about a person in it. It was not paranoia. He would have told you it was inventory. You cannot secure a place you have not counted. The Ellingtons lived on 22, in the corner unit with the bowed windows. Bradford Ellington was 51, tall, careful, and permanently 3 minutes behind where he wanted to be. He ran a firm called Ellington Assay, which existed to answer one deceptively boring question for manufacturers. Where did this metal actually come from? If you build surgical implants, or aircraft fasteners, or the capacitors inside a hospital ventilator, you need to know that the tantalum in them came out of a mine that is what it claims to be, and not out of a hole in the ground where the accounting is done with a rifle. Ellington's people did that certification. It was not glamorous work. It was the kind of work that made a small number of extremely wealthy men extremely angry roughly twice a year. Delane Ellington was a restoration architect who could talk about lime mortar for 90 minutes without noticing. And there were the children. Ivy was 9. Ivy counted things. Not in an anxious way, in an accountant's way, with satisfaction. She counted the coffers in the lobby ceiling, 96, the brass mail slots, 104, though 11 were sealed, and the number of steps from the elevator to the door, 23, or 19 if you cut the corner, which she was not supposed to do. She wore a red duffel coat with wooden toggles, and she had informed Emmett, in October, that the compass rose in the floor was wrong, because true north was over there, and she pointed at the mailroom. She was right. Emmett had checked. He told her so the next morning. Seriously, the way you tell a colleague. And Ivy Ellington had gone up the elevator that day about 4 inches taller than she came in. Paxton was 6 and traveled everywhere with a gray stuffed rabbit named Doorstop, so named because Paxton had once used it to hold open the door of the mailroom and had been extremely proud of the innovation. "Morning, Mr. Tiernan," Ivy would say. Morning, Miss Ellington. You know it's supposed to snow 4 inches. I heard 6. 4. I checked 2 places. Then it's 4, Emmett would say, and hold the door. Behind him, the rest of the staff ran the ordinary machinery of the place. Morris Talcott worked the overnight desk and had been at the Corvain for 31 years. He was 63, kept a paperback under the counter, and had a memory for faces that was, in Emmett's professional opinion, better than most watch officers he had served with. Wilma Dunaway managed the building, and managed it well, which mostly meant absorbing complaints so that nobody else had to. Zachary Gallagher, 22, worked the porter's cart and wanted to be a firefighter and asked Emmett about fitness tests roughly once a week. And down in the garage, on the ramp level, Winston Yates parked cars. Winston was 27. He was quick, funny, good with the residents, and 11 months into a hole he had dug, with an app on his phone, at 2 in the morning, during a season when he could not stop being sure that the next one would come in. Emmett had noticed the hole in November, not the gambling exactly, but the shape of it. Winston had stopped eating lunch. Winston had started volunteering for doubles and then vanishing during them. Winston flinched at his own phone. Emmett had told Wilma that Winston seemed like he was carrying something and might need help. Wilma had said she would keep an eye out. That was the extent of what Emmett could do, and he knew it, and it bothered him. On the 4th of February, at 8:52 in the morning, a man in a gray overcoat came into the lobby behind a resident who was struggling with a stroller, held the inner door open with real courtesy, waited for her, and then stood for 90 seconds looking at the ceiling like a tourist. Emmett watched him in the brass. The man did not take out a phone. That was the thing. In 11 years of people standing in that lobby looking up at that ceiling, every single one of them had taken out a phone. This one did not photograph anything, because he was not admiring it. He was counting exits. He left. Emmett wrote it on the second sheet of the clipboard. 0852. M-Y-ash. 50s. Gray wool overcoat. Brown boots. Resold. Tailgated at inner door. No phone. Exited east. He drew a small box next to it, the way he had once marked things that were not yet a problem, but were not yet nothing. He would look at that line again in 18 days, and it would be the first thread he pulled. 22 years earlier, a recruiter in Columbus had looked at a 17-year-old Emmett Tiernan and told him, kindly, that he was too skinny. Emmett came back in 90 days weighing 21 pounds more, and did not say a word about it, and that turned out to be the most accurate preview of his entire career that anyone ever got. He was not the fastest man in any room he ever entered. He was simply the one who was still doing the thing correctly in hour 19, when correct had stopped feeling like a reward and started feeling like a punishment. By 34, he was leading a squadron. That word does a lot of hiding. What it means, practically, is that a few dozen of the most capable violent problem solvers the country produces would stand in a hangar at 2 in the morning and look at him, and he would tell them what was going to happen, and then it would happen. And if it did not happen the way he said, the reason would be his. His specialty became the thing nobody puts on a recruiting poster: hostage recovery. Not the movie version, the real one, which is 98% patience and paper. Cell site dumps, vehicle patterns. Who buys food and how much? Because 8 men guarding 2 people eat differently than 3 men guarding 2 people. He learned that a kidnapping is not a crime that happens. It is a business that operates, and every business leaves a ledger. And if you can read the ledger, you can find the warehouse. 14 recoveries. He never once described a single one of them at a dinner table. Then Caracas. The target package came from outside, a private intelligence firm on contract, the kind that had bloomed like mold in the years when everyone had money and nobody had time. The package said a Norwegian shipping executive's twin daughters were being held in a 2-story house in a hillside barrio, 4 guards, no hostiles under 20, and a hard deadline because the family had refused to pay and the tone of the calls had changed. The package was wrong, not sloppy wrong, manufactured. There were 9 men in that house, not 4. There were no twins in it at all. The twins were 40 minutes away in a mechanic's garage, and they had been for 6 days. And the reason the package pointed at the house was that the man who wrote it had been paid to have the assault happen at a specific place and hour, so that a different transaction, involving a different family and a great deal of money, could complete quietly on the other side of the city while every police radio in the state was screaming about the barrio. Emmett's men went through that door on the strength of a document. Malik Varga died on the stairs. Theodore Pellerin died in the doorway of a bedroom that had a mattress in it and no children. Varga had a daughter who was 7. Pellerin had been out of a different marriage for a year and was, in the way of men who are 29 and good at their job, insufferably happy about his life. The twins were recovered 11 days later by the Venezuelan police, alive by luck. The after-action was thorough and honest and useless. The firm that produced the package restructured, changed names, and continued. The man who wrote it was identified in a footnote only by a role, external assessment lead, because the contract had been drafted by people who understood that a name in a document is a liability and a role is not. Nobody was charged. 2 folded flags went to 2 families in 2 different states, and Emmett Tiernan stood in both living rooms and told the truth as far as he was allowed to tell it, which was not far enough. Then he came home and put in his papers. He was 38, had spent 11 years teaching men that the plan is sacred, that you brief it, you rehearse it, you execute it, and that the discipline of the plan is what brings everyone home. And then a plan written by a man he never met, for reasons that had nothing to do with anybody's daughter, had killed 2 of his people, and Emmett had carried it in and set it down on the stairs himself. He could not go back into a hangar and tell 30 men to trust a document again, so he left. His marriage did not survive the year after, which was not anybody's fault, and which he never once blamed on the army. He took an apartment in a walk-up in Irving Park, 1 bedroom, a hot plate, a good chair, and a wall of books about civil engineering, because he had discovered he liked reading about how bridges hold themselves up. A door is the one thing in the world that is either right or wrong, all the time, with no ambiguity. It is open or it is closed. The person coming through it belongs or does not. There is no assessment lead. There is no footnote. There is a man, standing where he said he would stand, doing a small thing correctly, forever. He did not know any of that on the February day, very much like the one that would eventually blow his quiet life apart, when he walked past the Corvain, saw a hand-lettered card in the window that said door staff wanted, inquire within, and stood on the sidewalk for a long time. Wilma Dunaway hired him in 11 minutes. He wrote 3 rules on the inside cover of a notebook the first week, and he kept them. 1. You are not who you were, and the day you need somebody to know it, you have already gone wrong. 2. Watch everything, log everything, escalate nothing you cannot prove. 3. The job is the people in the building, not the building. For 6 years, those rules held. He opened the door for a federal judge and for a woman who cleaned apartments on 4 floors and gave both of them exactly the same 30 seconds. The rules held until 4:11 on the afternoon of the 22nd of February, when they stopped holding all at once. The thing that would take Ivy and Paxton Ellington did not begin as a kidnapping. It began as a scheduling problem. 11 weeks before February, in an office in a converted rope factory on the Chicago River, a man named Cyprian Holcomb was told a number he did not like. Holcomb was 64 and controlled a private group that moved refined tantalum and a handful of related rare metals into the North American supply chain, the gray, unglamorous middle of an industry most people never think about, where a single container can be worth more than the building it is stored in. Roughly 40% of what Holcomb moved came through a corridor whose paperwork had been, for years, gently and profitably fictional. Then a mid-sized certification firm out of Chicago won a contract to audit the entire corridor for 3 American manufacturers at once, and Bradford Ellington's people started asking for smelter-level assay records going back 6 years. Ellington did not know what he had. He knew a lab in Ontario had returned trace element signatures that did not match the declared origin on 11 shipments, and that when he asked the supplier to clarify, he received, within 4 days, an offer to buy his firm for 3 times what it was worth. He declined. He received a better offer, and declined that too, and told his wife over a kitchen island at 11 at night that when a man offers you triple for a company that does nothing but tell the truth about metal, what he is buying is the silence. He was absolutely correct, and he had no idea how expensive being correct was about to get. Holcomb did not employ criminals. Holcomb employed a consultant. The consultant was 58, silver, soft-spoken, and had been operating under some version of the same job description for 30 years. He had been a case officer once, briefly and unremarkably. He had been a risk analyst. He had been an external assessment lead. Now he sold something he described, to the small number of men who could afford him, as leverage architecture, the design of pressure. He had a small, disciplined crew he had worked with for a decade, and an absolutely inflexible operating philosophy, which was this: you never buy a man. You buy the 40 hours of his life in which he cannot think. His name was Everard Tyrrell. He had not used it in 11 years. Tyrrell's assessment of Bradford Ellington ran to 9 pages and concluded that Ellington could not be bribed, could not be usefully threatened in his own person, was insulated corporately, and was, this was underlined, sentimental about his children in a way that was operationally significant. The recommendation was not a ransom. Tyrrell despised ransoms. Money leaves a trail and creates an incentive to pursue. The recommendation was a 72-hour absence, professionally executed, ending in the children's safe return the moment a certain audit was quietly rescoped, with a ransom demand attached to the front of it purely as camouflage, because a ransom makes the police look for money, and a man looking for money is not looking for a corridor of tantalum. He priced the job at $900,000. Holcomb agreed, and never asked a single question about method, which was exactly the sort of client Tyrrell preferred. The crew assembled in December. Nelson Cadogan planned and drove. He was the one in the gray overcoat who had stood in the Corvain's lobby on the 4th of February counting exits, and he was extremely good. And his only flaw, which he did not know he had, was that he had been taught his craft by Tyrrell, which meant he did everything the same way Tyrrell had always done it. Julius Napier handled the physical end. He had been a nightclub door in Cleveland and then something worse in Cleveland, and he had one virtue. He did what he was told, precisely, including the part where nobody touches a child. And Carla Montrose was the one who would actually walk the children out, because she was 46 and warm and had the unremarkable competence of a woman who has spent her life in scrubs. She came Tuesdays and Fridays with a canvas bag, signed the visitor log as a home physical therapist for a resident in 3B. A real resident, an 81-year-old man with a real hip replacement, who did in fact have a rotating cast of AIDS and who could not have told you which was which. Morris Talcott waved her through every time, because she belonged. That was the whole trick. She belonged. They ran the building for 11 weeks. They learned that the fire panel was in the mailroom vestibule, that a pull station on floor 2 would put the elevators into recall automatically, that the west service corridor exited onto the loading apron where the delivery bay door stayed up between 3 and 4:30, and that the security cameras were a 2014 system with 16 days of retention and 1 blind arc across the loading apron because a bracket had been bent by a mattress delivery in 2022 and never straightened. And they learned that the doorman came off shift at 4. That last item is the one that would ruin them, and it went into Cadogan's notes as a convenience. There was one thing they could not get from the outside: the fob. The garage-level service doors were on a separate credential group, and getting the children from the service corridor into a vehicle without crossing the lobby required a fob that opened the ramp gate from inside, which is where Winston Yates came in. Nobody threatened him. That was not Tyrrell's way. A pleasant man bought him a beer on Wells 4 times, established that he owed $31,000 across 4 apps and 1 person who was not an app, and was sympathetic. Then he mentioned that a client of his did asset recovery work, repossession mostly, and occasionally needed 20 minutes of access to a garage, no confrontation, no damage, $8,000 for a duplicate credential, and a shift schedule. He gave them a cloned fob on the 29th of January and the 4-week staffing rota on the 9th of February, and he took $12,000 in total, and he began sleeping about 3 hours a night. Emmett watched him get worse and could not name it. On the 19th of February, 3 days out, Cadogan sat in a car on the east side of the building for 40 minutes, which was more than 20, and Emmett logged the plate on the second sheet of his clipboard without knowing why the shape of it bothered him. On the 21st, Carla Montrose came for her Tuesday visit to 3B, and on the way out she stopped and said something kind to Paxton Ellington about his rabbit, and Paxton told her its name, and she said, "Doorstop. That's a very good name," and Paxton beamed. Emmett was holding the door and heard it, and thought nothing at all. That was the last hour of the old life. He would replay it about 4,000 times. The 22nd of February was a Thursday, and it was snowing, the kind of snow that does not stick. Emmett Tiernan's shift ended at 4. At 3:58 he took off the gray wool coat with the brass buttons and hung it in the staff closet and put on his own, which was a canvas work jacket with a torn cuff. At 4:04 he went out through the revolving door, because he always went out through the front, because he had told himself 6 years ago that a man who sneaks out the back of his own building has started to think the building is a job. At 4:06 he was at the corner waiting for the light. At 4:07, on the second floor of the Corvain, a gloved hand broke the glass on a pull station in the north stair vestibule. The alarm in that building is not a bell. It is a low, penetrating electronic pulse, followed by a recorded voice, and it does two things automatically. It puts both passenger elevators into fire service recall, sending them to the lobby and holding them with their doors open, and it releases the maglocks on the stairwell doors. For approximately 4 minutes, the Corvain stopped being a secure building and became a corridor. Delane Ellington was in a meeting in Evanston. Bradford Ellington was in a conference room downtown with 2 lawyers and a phone. Ivy and Paxton were on 22 with a sitter named Rasmussen, who was 23 years old, and who had, at 4:07, exactly the reaction that every single fire drill of her life had trained into her. She got the children into their coats and took them to the stairs. They came down 20 flights. Paxton counted the landings out loud for a while and then stopped. Ivy held his hand on the turns. Carla Montrose was waiting on the third-floor landing with her canvas bag, in scrubs, with a laminated badge on a lanyard, and she was the most reassuring thing in that stairwell. "There you are," she said. "Okay, sweetheart, you're 22, right? They're doing the floors in order, and they want everybody out through the west side. The front's jammed up with the trucks coming in. You want to come with me? We'll get out the quick way. You too, hun. Come on." Rasmussen hesitated for 1.5 seconds. In that 1.5 seconds, Carla Montrose said, "Hey, doorstop, right?" and smiled at the rabbit, and Paxton said, "Yeah," delightedly, and the sitter's entire threat assessment collapsed, because a stranger does not know the name of the rabbit. They went out onto 3 and along the west service corridor. Rasmussen came too, and 30 feet from the loading apron, Julius Napier stepped out of the linen alcove behind her and put a hand over her mouth and a folded coat around her arms, and had her on the floor of the alcove, restrained, gagged with medical tape, and entirely unhurt, in under 6 seconds. She never saw his face. Ivy turned at the sound. What Ivy Ellington saw was a large man kneeling on the sitter's back, and what Ivy Ellington did, 9 years old, in a red duffel coat, was let go of her brother's hand and take 1 step toward the man. Carla Montrose caught her around the shoulders, gently, the way you catch a child at a curb, and said, it's okay, she's okay. She just fell. We have to go. We have to go right now." And the trained obedience of every child who has ever been evacuated by an adult in a uniform did the rest. At 4:10, the ramp gate on the loading apron rolled up on a cloned credential. At 4:11, a white panel van with a magnetic sign that said Meridian Floor and Tile on both sides pulled out onto the side street with 2 children in it, turned right again, and was on Lakeshore Drive in 90 seconds. 4 minutes and 11 seconds, start to finish. Bradford Ellington was told at 4:41, in a conference room, by his building manager. He was back at the Corvain by 5:20, and by then it had become the thing those places always become, a lobby full of radios. 2 patrol units, then a sergeant, then, at 6:05, Detective Janice Grissom and Detective Elliot Norquist from Area 3, then a public information officer, and then, because Bradford Ellington had made 2 phone calls in the car, a private crisis response consultant in a very good coat who arrived at 6:40 with a laptop bag and handed out 3 business cards in the first 4 minutes. Emmett Tiernan found out at 5:58, standing in his kitchen in Irving Park with a bag of frozen peas in his hand, when Wilma Dunaway called him. He asked 4 questions. What time did the alarm go? What door did they leave by? Is anyone hurt? Is Winston still in the building? Wilma answered the first 3, and then said, "Winston." "Why Winston?" And Emmett said, "Wilma, do not let anybody leave," and was already putting the peas down. The fire department arrived at 4:14, to a building with no fire in it, and it took 11 minutes to find the sitter in the alcove. He was back at the building at 6:31, in his own coat with the torn cuff, and the officer at the door did not recognize him and did not want to let him in. For 6 years, Emmett Tiernan had been the man who decided who came into that building. He stood on the sidewalk in the snow for 4 minutes and did not argue, because arguing with a post is what amateurs do. And eventually, Morris Talcott saw him through the glass and came out and got him. That, right there, was the whole shape of the next 14 hours. Inside, the lobby had been rearranged into a command post by people who had never worked in it. The crisis consultant had set up on the mail table and was explaining proof-of-life protocol to Bradford Ellington in a voice pitched to be overheard. Detective Grissom, who was 49 and had run more of these than she wanted to count, was doing the actual work. The van, the plate, the cameras, the sitter's statement, the visitor log. The visitor log. Emmett watched a uniformed officer photograph the visitor log with a phone, 4 pages of it, and put it back on the desk. He walked to the desk, and he did not touch it, and he read the last 9 days upside down, which is a skill you acquire when you have spent your life reading things over the shoulders of people who did not want you to. Then he turned around and looked at the compass rose on the floor for a long moment, at the smear of grit that ran from the elevator bank toward the west corridor, tracked in by 40 firefighters, obliterating everything. And he thought, with a clarity that frightened him a little, they are going to lose these children, and everyone in this room is going to have done their job. The call came at 7:52 that evening. It came to Bradford Ellington's personal cell, from a number that resolved an hour later to a prepaid device that had been activated 11 days earlier in a gas station in Hammond, Indiana, and that would be in a river before midnight. Detective Grissom had coached him for 90 minutes. Keep him talking. Ask for proof of life. Do not agree to anything. Bradford Ellington did all of it, and it did not matter, because the man on the other end was not negotiating. He was reading. He was also laughing. That was the detail everyone in that lobby would remember. Not the threat, the amusement underneath it, warm and unhurried, the laugh of a man telling a story at a dinner party. He laughed at Bradford's voice. He laughed at the pause where Bradford was clearly being coached. Mr. Ellington, you have a very nice lobby. I want to say that first. Who is this? $2 million. Cash is a fantasy, so we'll do it properly, and I'll walk you through the mechanism, because I don't think you've done this before. A small chuckle. By dawn, 6:41 is sunrise. I looked it up for you. I want to speak to my children. Of course you do. A rustle. And then, this was the part that took the room apart. A child's voice, close and thin and absolutely calm in the way that terrifies a parent more than screaming, "Dad, it's Ivy. We're okay. Paxton has doorstop." There were 3. A hand covered the phone. "There's your proof of life," the man said. "She's a serious little person, isn't she? Please. 2 million by dawn, or we start sending their body parts. And Mr. Ellington, I'll do the small ones first, so we have room to negotiate." He said it lightly. He laughed at the end of the sentence. Bradford Ellington went the color of paper. He set the phone down on the mail table with both hands, very carefully, like a man setting down something that might go off, and then he sat down on the marble step below the elevator bank because his legs stopped. For about 11 seconds, nobody in that lobby said anything. Then Detective Grissom went back to work, because that is the job, the carrier, the warrant, every camera on Lakeshore Drive between 4:11 and 4:20, and Emmett could hear it and knew exactly how it was going to go. The van would be found burned inside 12 hours in a lot in Cicero. The phone would be dead. By the time anyone had a name, the ledger would have closed. The crisis consultant crouched next to Bradford and said, with enormous confidence, that the good news was that these people were professionals, and professionals want money and not violence, and the correct move was to structure a partial payment to buy time. And Bradford Ellington, who had spent his whole career being told what a number meant by people with a stake in the answer, looked up at him with an expression of pure animal helplessness and said, "I can get 2 million. I can get it by 3 in the morning. Just tell me who to give it to." Emmett Tiernan had been standing at the door for 2 hours, doing the only thing he still knew how to do, counting. He walked 8 steps across the compass rose. "Mr. Ellington," the consultant put a hand out, not aggressively, Just the automatic gesture of a man moving furniture. "Sir, we're in the middle of—" "Mr. Ellington," Emmett said again, and something in the second one made Bradford Ellington look up. Emmett crouched down so they were level. He did not lower his voice, but he did not raise it either. "Sir, keep your money. I'll bring both children before the dinner." The room did what rooms do. Detective Norquist made a sound that was almost a laugh and turned it into a cough. The consultant's eyebrows went up in a way that was, in its own quiet fashion, one of the most insulting gestures Emmett had ever received in his life. Wilma Dunaway said, "Emmett," softly, "the way you say a friend's name when they have embarrassed themselves in public." Morris Talcott, who had known him 6 years, looked at him hard, and Morris Talcott was the only one who did not smile. And Bradford Ellington, in the worst hour of his life, said the truest and most human thing anyone said all night. "You're the doorman." "Yes, sir." "You open the door." "Yes, sir." 6 years. Bradford Ellington's face came apart. "Then what? What are you?" He stopped. He put his hand over his mouth. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was— It's all right." Detective Grissom came over then, because she had noticed, as good detectives do, that the room's temperature had changed. She was not unkind about it. She said, "Sir, I appreciate that. Right now the best thing you can do is give my officer a full statement about the entry points, because you know this building better than the plans do." "I'll do that," Emmett said. "It'll take 4 minutes. Then I want to tell you 3 things, and you're going to think I'm wrong about all 3, and I'd like you to write them down anyway, so that when one of them turns out right, you'll take the other 2 seriously." Grissom looked at him properly for the first time. "Go ahead." 1. The ransom is not real. The number's too round, the deadline's too short, and he told you the sunrise time. He's performing a kidnapping for you, so you'll investigate a kidnapping. Somebody wants Mr. Ellington's attention off something for 3 days. 2. They had a fob. That gate does not open from outside, and it did not fail. There's a credential in this building that walked. I'd start with the ramp level. 3. The woman on the stairs knew the boy's rabbit by name. She heard that in this lobby, and the only day she could have heard it was Tuesday. Your camera retention is 16 days, and the loading apron has a blind arc, but the lobby doesn't. She is on that drive 9 times, minimum, and she signed a real name into that log at least once, because she needed to get past Morris, and Morris looks. Grissom stopped writing. "Why 9? "Because she came Tuesdays and Fridays and I saw her go up," Emmett said. "I just didn't see her." There was a silence. Then the crisis consultant said, pleasantly, "Detective, with respect, we should not be running theories from the staff." And Grissom said, "I've got it," and took the statement, and put the notebook away, and went back to the phone carrier, because the phone carrier was procedure, and procedure is what you have. Emmett Tiernan stood up, put on the coat with the torn cuff, and walked out through the revolving door at 8:34 p.m. He was not walking away. He had, in the previous 6 minutes, obtained 3 things, and none of the people in that lobby had noticed him take any of them. The sitter's description of the woman, in the sitter's own words, overheard twice. The fact that the ramp gate had opened on a valid credential at 4:10 and not been forced, and the memory of one line, written in his own handwriting, on the second sheet of a clipboard, 18 days ago, 0852, M-W, 50s, gray wool overcoat, brown boots, resold boots, on a 50-year-old man in a $900 overcoat. That was not a man who was cheap. That was a man who had found a pair of boots that fit and had refused to give them up, twice, over years. And Emmett Tiernan had known exactly one man in his life who did that, and had read a 9-page assessment written in that man's flat, amused, unhurried voice, in a plywood room in Virginia, 6 years ago, at 2 in the morning, with 2 folded flags waiting on the other side of it. He got to the corner and had to put a hand on the mailbox. Then he took out his phone and called a number he had not dialed in 4 years. And when a woman's voice answered, he said, "Tegan, it's Tiernan. He's alive and he's here. And he took 2 kids out of my building 4 hours ago. I need everything you can get me by midnight." There was one beat of silence. Then Tegan Hackworth said, "Say the address." There is a thing that people who have never done this work do not understand, and it is the reason Emmett Tiernan did not run anywhere that night. A kidnapping is not a chase. It is an accounting problem. 3 or 4 people are now running a small illegal business with a hard cost structure. A building with power and no neighbors. A vehicle they can burn and one they cannot. Food for 6 instead of 4, and one of the 6 is a boy of 6 who will not eat what the others eat. Phones to throw away and a place to throw them. Every one of those needs is a transaction, and every transaction is a mark on a ledger somewhere. You do not find the children. You find the ledger, and the ledger has an address on it. Emmett did not go home. He went 4 blocks to an all-night place on Division, with a back booth and terrible coffee, and he took out a legal pad, and he built the ledger. Tegan Hackworth got there at 9:40 with a laptop bag and a face like a closed door. For 6 years she had been the intelligence sergeant attached to his squadron, the person who built the target packages, which is exactly why Caracas had nearly destroyed her too. She had left 8 months after he did, and now ran a data recovery shop in Pilsen that pulled family photos off drowned phones. She opened the laptop and said, "Tell me the whole thing in order, and don't editorialize." He told it in 11 minutes. When he finished, she said, "Boots, boots." "Emmett, that's not evidence. That's a bruise. It's not the boots. It's the boots plus the 90 seconds under the ceiling, plus the fire panel, plus the ransom. That isn't a ransom." He turned the legal pad around. "Look at the shape. Alarm to open the building. A uniform to move the children. Not force. A uniform. Restrain the third party and don't hurt her. Blind arc on the camera. Ransom loud enough to fill the room and short enough that nobody has time to think about why. That is not a cruise plan, Tegan. That is a design. And I've read this designer." Tegan looked at the pad for a long moment. Then she said quietly, 14 recoveries and you never once said the word design about any of them. Because I only ever read one. She started typing. Lester Kolstad arrived at 10:20 with snow on his shoulders and a hard case, because Lester never went anywhere without the hard case. He had been Emmett's breacher for 4 years, and now ran a commercial locksmith business in Berwyn, with 2 vans and his name on both. He listened, said, "Okay," and did not ask a single question about why they were not calling the FBI, which was the most Lester Kolstad thing that had ever happened. Rudolph Massaro came in at 10:35, still in the polo shirt from the agricultural dealership in Joliet, where he sold spray drones to soybean farmers, and where, 4 times a year, he was the smartest person about airspace in any room in the Midwest. "Whatever it is, I'm in it," he said, "but I have a daughter now, and I would like to not go to prison." By 11 o'clock, the back booth of a diner on Division had become the most effective investigative cell in the state of Illinois, and it had no warrants, no database access, and no legal authority of any kind. What it had was the building. That was the thing nobody in the lobby had understood. Detective Grissom had the crime scene. Emmett had 6 years of the crime scene. 6 years of knowing which of the 16 cameras actually pointed where the sticker said it pointed, which fob groups had been recorded and when, that the visitor log's 3rd page had a coffee ring on it since December, so any page that did not have the ring was a page that had been replaced, and that the loading apron's blind arc was blind at eye level but not blind at 8 feet, because the bent bracket tipped the lens up, not down. Not blind at 8 feet. There is a fire lane sign on the apron at 8 feet. "Tegan," he said, "there's a second camera nobody counts. It's the one on the parapet for the roof drains. It's on the same recorder. It sees the apron from above at an angle, and everybody who has ever pulled that footage has pulled the 16 lobby channels and stopped. Can you get it? Wilma Dunaway can get it. Wilma Dunaway will get it. Because Wilma Dunaway watched a 9-year-old walk through her lobby every day for 4 years. He called her at 11:14 at night. She was still in the building. She did not ask him why the police could not do it. She said, 'How do I export it?' And he talked her through it. And at 11:52, a file landed in Tegan Hackworth's inbox showing, from above and behind, a white van with a magnetic sign, a ramp gate opening on a credential at 4:10:22, and, for 1.5 seconds as the van turned, the top of the driver's forearm through the open window, and a watch. "That's nothing," Rudy said. "That's a Seiko field watch on a canvas strap worn on the inside of the wrist," Emmett said, "which is nothing. But look at the gate." They looked at the gate. "It opens at 4:10:22, Tegan said slowly. "And it opened at 4:08:50. Twice. Somebody tested it 90 seconds before. Emmett sat back in the booth. You don't test a credential you're confident in. You test one you were given by an amateur. He tapped the table twice. He's in the building, right now. They're keeping him there because a man who runs is a man who talks, and a man who shows up for his shift looks innocent for about 4 days. At 12:20 in the morning, Emmett Tiernan walked back into the Corvain through the service entrance with a key he had been issued legally 6 years earlier, and he did not go to the lobby, where 2 detectives and a crisis consultant were watching a phone that was never going to ring again. He went down the ramp to the garage. Winston Yates was sitting in the attendant's booth with the light off, in his coat, not working, staring at the concrete, with his phone face down on the counter and his hands flat on either side of it, like a man bracing for turbulence. He looked up and saw the doorman standing in the doorway of the booth, and he started to cry before Emmett said a single word. Emmett did not touch him. That is worth saying, because everything about the next 20 minutes ran against every instinct a person has when 2 children are gone and the man who opened the gate is sitting in front of them. Julius Napier would have gotten what he needed in 90 seconds, and it would have been half true. Emmett had learned, in rooms in 3 countries, that a frightened man will tell you whatever ends the fear, and that whatever ends the fear is not information. It is noise, and noise gets people killed. Winston, I'm going to tell you what I already know, so you don't have to decide anything. Winston made a sound. The ramp gate opened at 4:08:50, and again at 4:10:22. It opened on a valid credential in the maintenance group. Nobody in maintenance was on the apron at 4 o'clock, because the apron rota is on the wall behind your head, and I wrote half of it. Winston Yates put both hands over his face. Here's the part I need you to hear, Emmett said. In about 6 hours, the FBI is going to be in this garage, and by then, this will be a federal kidnapping with a child under 10 in it, and every single thing you say after that will be said with a lawyer in the room, and it will save you nothing, because they will already have the fob audit. Right now, for the next 20 minutes, there is a version of you that helped. After that, there is only the version that took $12,000. They said nobody would be there, Winston said, through his hands. They said it was cars. I know, they said it was cars. Winston, what's his name? He never said a name. He was shaking. He bought me a beer, 4 times. He knew my mom's. He knew about my mom's surgery. He knew, of course he did. What did he look like? 50s. Gray coat. Really nice coat. Winston stopped, and his face did something strange, and he said, he had, like, old boots. I remember, 'cause the coat was so nice, and the boots were beat to hell, and I thought that was weird. Emmett Tiernan closed his eyes for 1 second. Where did you meet him? A bar on Wells. And then twice at a place out by Cicero, off Ogden, 'cause he said it was on his way. What place? I don't know the name. Winston wiped his face. It's a metal building. There's a lot of boats in it. It's like a boat storage place, with a bar in the front. Half the year it's dead. Dorrance? Doynes, maybe. It's off Ogden by the canal. Tegan Hackworth had a satellite view of the canal corridor inside 90 seconds, and a Doynes marine storage with a 1994 permit history and a current gas account that, when she pulled the publicly filed utility disclosures for the block, was running about 11 times its December average. 11 times, Rudy said. In February. In an unheated barn. You'd need heat, Tegan said, if you had people in it. You'd need a lot of heat, Emmett said, if you had people in it, and you'd also just put in a temporary electrical service, which is the second line on that account. He looked at Winston Yates for a long moment. You're going to go upstairs, he said, and you're going to ask for Detective Janice Grissom by name, and you're going to tell her exactly what you told me, and you're not going to leave anything out, including the 12,000. And Winston, she's going to arrest you. That's not me failing to help you. That's what has to happen so that the rest of it counts. Winston Yates stood up on legs that did not work well, and at the door of the booth he turned around and asked the only question he had left. Are they alive? Yes, Emmett said. He doesn't hurt them, because hurting them costs him money, and he has never once in his life spent money on anything that wasn't necessary. He heard his own voice say it, and it came out cold and flat, and Winston flinched from it more than he had flinched from anything else all night. At 1:35 in the morning, in a diner booth on Division Street, Tegan Hackworth turned her laptop around. She had spent 4 hours pulling a thread he could not have pulled. The corporate filings, the dissolved private intelligence firm from the Caracas after-action, the 3 successor entities, the consultancy registered in Delaware in 2016, whose sole officer of record was a registered agent service. And in a 2021 deposition exhibit, a scanned expense schedule, filed publicly because a lawyer had not redacted an attachment, a line item for a consultant, reimbursed for travel to Caracas in the correct month of the correct year, under the name E. Tyrell. Emmett Tiernan looked at 4 letters on a screen in a diner for a long time. "Say it out loud," Tegan said. "Once, and then we work. Everard Tyrell." "Okay." She closed the laptop halfway. "Emmett, I need to ask you one question, and I need a real answer, because I will drive you there myself, but I'm not doing it if the answer's wrong." She waited until he looked at her. "Are we going to get those kids, or are we going to get him?" There was a pause that lasted about 4 seconds, and that Emmett would think about for the rest of his life. "The kids," he said. "Every decision. And if getting him costs us 30 seconds on the kids, he walks and I live with it." Tegan Hackworth nodded once. "Then let's build a package," she said. "A real one, this time." Doyne's Marine Storage sat on 11 acres of frozen gravel between the sanitary and ship canal and a road nobody used in winter. A 1970s steel barn, 180 feet long, a smaller office building, 4 rows of shrink-wrapped boats, and 1 sodium light on a pole. At 3:10 in the morning, Rudy Massaro stood 140 feet up and 1,100 feet out and flew a survey drone he was legally permitted to operate down the canal bank at a speed and altitude that made it, to anyone who heard it at all, a distant furnace fan. Thermal came back in 90 seconds and told them everything. 4 adults, 1 in the office building, alone, seated, stationary. The office had its own heat and its own vehicle, a dark sedan, backed in. 3 in the barn, 2 together near a rolling scaffold at the south end. 1 walking a slow oval at the north end past a shipping container that had been set inside the barn and skinned with rigid insulation, with a temporary electrical drop feeding it. And inside that container, 2 small heat signatures, close together, on the floor. Nobody in the diner booth said anything for a moment. "They're sitting up," Tegan said. "They're sitting up," Emmett agreed. And something went out of his shoulders that had been in them since 5:58 the previous evening. Then he started working, and this is where the story stops being a rescue and starts being a demolition. He did not plan to storm that barn. 4 adults, 1 structure, 2 children in a steel box, 3 men who would have 90 seconds of warning the moment a vehicle came up that gravel. He had led that assault before, on a hillside, on the strength of somebody else's paper, and 2 men had died in it. He was going to make Everard Tyrell empty his own building. He knew how, because the design had a signature. Tyrell always ran his people on a fixed protocol, because a protocol removes judgment, and Tyrell did not trust anybody's judgment but his own. In Caracas, that had not been a weakness. In Caracas, it had been the whole engine. But a protocol is a machine, and a machine will do what you feed it. Tegan had the crew's phone numbers in 40 minutes, from the one thing they had thrown away carelessly. Not the burner that called Bradford Ellington at 7:52. That one was dead. Its billing family. Prepaid devices activated in a block at the same store on the same day are provisioned in sequence, and the sequence gives you the neighbors. And the neighbors were not dead, because you do not burn the phones you are still using. At 4:05 a.m., Emmett Tiernan made 3 phone calls in 9 minutes. The first was to Detective Janice Grissom, and it lasted 2 minutes and 11 seconds, and it consisted of an address, a thermal image, a name, a corporate filing, a deposition exhibit, and the sentence, "Detective, I'm calling you first," on a recorded line, so that when this is over, the record shows I called you first. "I'd like you to bring everybody you have. I would ask you to stage on Ogden and not come up the gravel, because they will hear you at half a mile, and there is a steel box in that barn." Grissom, to her eternal credit, asked exactly one question. "How long have you had this?" 51 minutes. "Stay on the phone." "I can't." The second call was to a prepaid device on the north end of the barn, and Emmett did not say anything at all. He let it ring twice and hung up. Then he did it again, 11 seconds later. Then again, it is the oldest trick in that particular book, and it is nearly impossible to ignore, because a crew on a job with a protocol has one rule about the phone. An unknown pattern is an alert, and an alert is escalated to the principal. The third call was the one that mattered, and it went to the phone in the office building, and Everard Tyrrell answered it on the second ring with the pleasant, unhurried, faintly amused voice of a man who has never once been surprised. "You have the wrong number. External assessment lead," Emmett said. The silence on that line went on for 4 full seconds. It was, Emmett thought later, the single most satisfying sound of his adult life. Who is this? 22nd of April, 6 years ago. 9 pages. 4 guards. No hostiles under 20. 2-story structure in the barrio above Petare. You wrote that a family that had refused to pay had run out of time. Emmett's voice did not change at all. There were 9 men in that house. There were no children in it. Malik Varga. Theodore Pellerin. I want you to say those 2 names back to me. I don't know what you have about 11 minutes, Emmett said, before every unit in Cook County is on Ogden. I'm calling you because I want you to leave. Take the sedan. Go east. I'm not police, and I'm not going to chase you, and your 3 employees are going to go to prison for a federal kidnapping, and you are going to be a footnote again. And Everard Tyrrell, 58 years old, 30 years of never being in a room he had not priced, did the one thing his entire operating philosophy demanded, which is the thing Emmett Tiernan had built the last 4 hours around. He decided the operation was compromised, and he executed his own protocol. The protocol said, on compromise, the principal separates from the hold site immediately, the crew relocates the assets to the secondary vehicle, and the hold site is abandoned within 4 minutes. Which meant that at 4:19 in the morning, of their own free will, 3 men opened a steel barn, opened an insulated shipping container, and walked 2 children across 110 feet of open gravel toward a van, in the dark, under a single sodium light. With no walls, no door to breach, no 90 seconds of warning to give anybody, and with Lester Kolstad lying under a shrink-wrapped 32-foot bayliner 19 feet from the van, where he had been, without moving, in 9-degree cold, for 55 minutes. What happened on that gravel took 19 seconds, and there is almost nothing to describe. Rudy Massaro brought the drone down the length of the barn at 40 feet with the obstacle lights on, which is a thing a drone does not do, and every adult on that apron looked up, because human beings look up, always, and because a light in the sky at 4 in the morning is an aircraft, and an aircraft is police. Julius Napier, who was carrying Paxton Ellington, turned toward the barn. Carla Montrose, who had Ivy by the wrist, turned toward the road. Nelson Cadogan, who was 11 feet from the van, and the only one of them with a weapon out, turned toward the light, and Lester Kolstad came out from under a boat behind him and took him down onto frozen gravel so fast that the sound of the impact reached the barn before anybody understood that a man had moved. And Emmett Tiernan, who had crossed the last 140 feet during the 4 seconds every head was tipped back, took Paxton Ellington out of Julius Napier's arms. He did not fight Napier for him. He arrived at the man's blind side, put one hand under the boy and one flat on Napier's chest, and stepped through. And by the time Napier's hands closed on nothing, the doorman was 11 feet away, with a 6-year-old's face pressed into his shoulder. Julius Napier ran. He got 400 yards up the canal bank and was taken off it at 4:31 by a Cook County sergeant who had staged on Ogden exactly as asked. Carla Montrose let go of Ivy Ellington's wrist, sat down on the gravel, and put her hands on her head without being told, because she had been a nurse for 9 years before she was this, and somewhere in her, the reflex to be told what to do by a competent person was still the strongest thing in her. Ivy Ellington stood in the middle of an open lot in the dark in a red duffel coat with her arms at her sides. Emmett Tiernan crouched down to her height, with her brother still on his hip. Miss Ellington. She looked at him. Her chin was going. 23 steps, Emmett said, or 19 if you cut the corner. And Ivy Ellington, who had counted the landings in a stairwell, and the men in a van, and the hours in a steel box, and who had not cried once in 12.5 hours in front of her little brother, walked 4 steps and put her forehead into the doorman's chest and came apart. The first squad car came up the gravel at 4:33. Everard Tyrell's sedan was stopped at 4:38 on Ogden Avenue, eastbound, by two Cicero patrol units who had been given the plate 40 minutes earlier by a detective from Area 3 who had chosen, and this was Janice Grissom's decision, and she made it in about 2 seconds on a phone in a lobby, to believe a doorman. He had a bag on the seat with 3 passports in it, none of them his. Here is the part that the news never carried, because it happened in a hallway. Emmett Tiernan had one conversation with Everard Tyrell in the corridor outside a booking room at the Cicero station at 6:10 in the morning, in front of a uniformed officer and a wall-mounted camera, and with Detective Janice Grissom standing 4 feet away with her arms folded, because Emmett had asked her to be there and had told her exactly why. He did not touch him. He did not raise his voice. He said 11 sentences, and the last 2 were these. You have never once been the person in the room who pays. Somebody wrote you a check for $900,000, and you designed a building full of children, and then you sat in a heated office 200 feet away from a steel box, and you were bored. So here is what happens now. Your client's name is Cyprian Holcomb, and I know that because you charged him travel the same careless way you charged it in 2021. And there is a woman in Pilsen who has been reading your paper trail all night, and at 9 o'clock this morning it goes to the United States Attorney with the audit that you were hired to stop, and Mr. Ellington is going to finish that audit, with a great deal more funding than he had yesterday, and with the entire supply chain paying attention. You spent 30 years being a footnote. Every single thing you touched through somebody else, and it kept you invisible, and you thought that was strength. It was just distance. And when they read this one out in court, they're going to read your name in it, out loud in a room with the family sitting behind you. Malik Varga, Theodore Pellerin, Ivy Ellington, Paxton Ellington. That's the sentence. You're in it now. Everard Tyrell said nothing at all, and for the first time in 30 years, his face did something. He was charged federally on 11 counts. Cyprian Holcomb's group was indicted in November on 22, including the corridor, and the corridor is now closed. Cadogan and Napier took 22 and 26 years. Carla Montrose cooperated fully from the first hour and took 9. Winston Yates pleaded guilty. He served 28 months. Emmett Tiernan wrote a letter to the sentencing judge, not asking for leniency, exactly, but describing accurately what a man looks like when he is being harvested by somebody who has done it before. And he was at the gate the morning Winston came out, because Winston's mother could not drive that far. Bradford Ellington tried to give Emmett Tiernan $2 million, and Emmett said, "Sir, I told you to keep your money. I'd like you to keep it. Then what do you want? Name it. Anything." Emmett Tiernan thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "Fund the audit. All of it. Every corridor, not just the one that came after you. There are people in a hole in the ground on the other side of the world who are in this story and who nobody has said out loud yet." Bradford Ellington funded the audit. It ran for 6 years and it is still running. Emmett kept the job. That surprised everybody, and it stopped surprising them after about a month, because it turned out he had not been hiding at that door. He had been doing something at it, and he went on doing it. He is still there most mornings. The brass door still turns with one finger, because he still oils it every 3rd Tuesday. There is one thing that changed. On the wall behind the desk at the Corvain, there is now a small brass plate with 2 names on it that mean nothing to anyone who reads them, and Emmett Tiernan put it there himself, and when residents ask, he says they were friends of his, which is true. And there is a 19-year-old woman studying structural engineering who calls him on the 22nd of February every year. She never says much. She usually just tells him the weather and how many inches it is supposed to snow and where she checked. So, the lobby. 11 people, 4 minutes gone, and I asked you to pick one, and you did not pick the man by the door. Neither did the detectives. Neither did the consultant with the business cards. And neither, crucially, did the man who had spent 11 weeks studying that building and had written the doorman's shift-end time into his notes as a convenience. What I keep coming back to is that Emmett Tiernan never corrected anybody, not once in 6 years. He could have said what he had been, and he never did, and I don't think that was humility. I think it was accounting. Being underestimated was not a wound. It was an asset with a balance in it, And you do not spend an asset like that on your own ego. You keep it quietly for 6 years, and then one Thursday in February, you spend all of it at once on somebody else's children. Everard Tyrell was, by trade, an assessor. He assessed people for a living. And the single most expensive mistake of his career was that he looked at a man in a gray coat with brass buttons and priced him at 0, because that is what the coat costs. So be careful with the 1/5 of a second. You are making assessments constantly about the man parking your car, the woman cleaning the floor of your office, the quiet person in the meeting who has not said anything, and you are making them on costume, and you are almost always wrong in the same direction. The person you have priced at 0 has a whole life behind them that you have never once asked about. And the other half of that, which is the harder half, if you are the one being priced at 0 right now, if you are doing work that people look through, that is not a verdict on you. It is information about them. Keep doing the small thing correctly. Keep the ledger. Stay ready. Because nobody in that lobby knew what they had until they needed it. And the man by the door already did.